Good evening, everyone. I'm Harold Holzer, and I have the honor of serving as director of Roosevelt House. And on behalf of Ann Kirshner, the president of Hunter College, I want to welcome you, and we're very grateful that you braved the heat. I don't know if the street is open, but the street was closed all day, so it's not been easy, I know, for you to get here. And we're happy that you're here. So on behalf of the LGBTQ Policy Center at Roosevelt House and its director, Professor Erin Mayo Adam, who is here and will be speaking to you afterwards, we're glad to be hosting this event. In a way, it's kind of a challenge for us to do Pride Month events at Roosevelt House because our students have finished their semesters, although we have some in the summer program, as Erin reminded me. And you know, they finish their academic years, and unless they're in the summer program, they're kind of off the premises. So they seldom come back, which is understandable, but I hope some and many others we know have registered to watch the program on Zoom. So when we have the Q&A part of this session, please remember to wait for microphones because we want for this to be recorded on our and used on our website, but also we'd like our Zoom attendees to have the opportunity to hear every question. So we're glad you're here for this important look back at the 15-year-long struggle to pass gay rights legislation in New York City. And what better place could there be to convene than at the home where Eleanor Roosevelt began her career in public service. Even if it was her mother-in-law who built this house, who kind of pushed her out of the house, we're glad she was pushed, and we're glad that she became a hero of so many human rights movements. For those who have never been here, this is, as you may know, the Roosevelt family's home, and FDR and Eleanor and their children lived here for 25 years. From 1908 until he left for the presidency. And his mother stayed here. And when she died, he could never bear to set foot in the house again. So he sold the house, kind of a sale, a $50,000 sale to Hunter College. And then almost 15 years ago, we reconstituted the place into a public policy institute. Before that, it was a center for clubs and social events. It was really hopping during World War II, but it's hopping again as a public policy institute. In the second floor library, where we all gathered to get our briefing before coming down, that's the room that served as a presidential transition headquarters for FDR after Election Day 1932. It's where the entire New Deal was hammered out in this one modest room. It didn't take a tower to change the world. It just took one library in this modest townhouse. So that's the history that animates everything we do here in the policy realm. And I'm happy that this particular group of panelists has gathered. I wish very much that Eldon Klingon had been here in person because I interviewed him in my first job as a reporter in 1970. And when he was the newly elected Liberal Party councilman at large in Manhattan. And we'll hear from him remotely in a second. I'm the one who dubbed him Clean Air Klingon, because among his other innovations, in addition to his early support for gay rights legislation, was his support of environmental policies, which was way out there in 1970. He claimed he didn't like Clean Air Klingon, but I think it was good for him. And I'm very happy that my longtime friend Alan Roscoff is here too. I've known him for many decades, beginning with Bella Abzug's campaigns. I'm waiting for a slide to come up. I know it will. Monica, how about there? There's the slide. Alan and I don't know, Alan, I can't find you in the picture, maybe because I've cropped it so closely, but this is the first citywide gay rights rally 1975. It's almost 50 years ago, and Bella Abzug was kind of an unannounced candidate for the Senate, and there she is, and that's her press secretary to our left, her right. That's me with hair in 1970. Alan and I did work for Mario Cuomo at the same time, and it's great to welcome such a veteran activist to Roosevelt House. My favorite part of Alan's bio, and I'll just mention it because it's not in the official bio in the programs you have, is that back in the 1970s, in prehistory, gay taxi drivers had to supply a letter from a psychiatrist verifying that they were sane enough to drive a cab in New York City. You can't make this stuff up. So Alan arrived at the Taxi and Limousine Commission disguised as a psychiatrist, whatever that means, but lugging an actual couch to demand that the chairman of the TLC submit to a psychiatric exam to keep his job. That was one of his early stunts and very visible. And guess what? The rules changed overnight. Gay taxi drivers did not have to be examined by a psychiatrist. So that's an early activist leader for you. Speaking of making history, I want also to thank Dr. Stephen Petrus, Director of Public History Programs at the LaGuardia and Wagner Archives at LaGuardia Community College. He organized this event. It turns out we've known each other too from time to time when he studied Civil War at the Gettysburg College. He'll be moderating the panel and formally introducing the panelists. But let me say, since he won't be introducing himself, that he's done amazing work at CUNY and also with the New York Historical Society and the Museum of the City of New York. In addition to his teaching and research, he's curated 6 LGBTQ exhibits, including First Grade Culture Wars, about an early battle over the rainbow curriculum. These things have been going on forever, too. And a show for LaGuardia on LGBTQ elected officials called A Seat at the Table. And the theme of A Seat at the Table is also a perfect segue to introduce another special guest for a few words of welcome of his own. Councilmember Eric Bottcher was elected in 2021 after I reminded him a race-turning Roosevelt House hosted debate at which he was the obvious star, and coasted after that. Listen, you just have to appear at Roosevelt House. He represents Greenwich Village, Chelsea, and the Midwest Side. He did previous work on housing for people with HIV/AIDS, and he was engaged at the council as a staff member and then worked for the same priorities on a statewide basis for the governor's office. He's now chair of the council LGBTQIA caucus, and it's a pleasure to have him back at Roosevelt House in person this time. Please join me in welcoming, for his welcome, Councilmember Eric Bottcher.
Thank you very, very much. Hi, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here among so many of you. My name's Eric Bottcher. I'm the city council member representing Council District 3, the west side of Manhattan, Greenwich Village, Chelsea, Hell's Kitchen. And tonight is a tremendously important night for me because I feel, as someone who represents a district that has had openly gay representation for 30 years, a district that is home to the birthplace of the modern LGBTQ civil rights movement, a district that was the epicenter of death during the HIV/AIDS crisis in New York City and across the country. I feel such a heavy weight of responsibility to honor those who made it even possible for me to be here, for me to even be alive as a gay man, and a responsibility to continue the fight that has been going on for so many years, a fight that we are far from winning, but a fight that we are winning, and a fight that we will win. But we've got so much more to do, and that's why I'm so excited to be here tonight to hear more about this historic battle in New York, Intro 2, the fight for legislation in New York City that would prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. A bill that the vast majority of New Yorkers are no longer familiar with, even members of our own community. And it's so important that we know about this legislation and the fight to win this legislation. A couple things that jump out at me about this bill is how long it took to pass. 15 years of disappointment, 15 years of violent opposition. Another characteristic is the violence of the opposition to this bill in New York City, a place that we today, despite our challenges, we see ourselves as such a welcoming place in all corners of the city. If you watch some of the footage from inside the city council chambers, it is truly horrific, the level of the opposition to this bill and the courage of the people who went there year after year after year. Alan Roscoff, from the day he helped author this legislation, going to the city council every year, going to all 5 boroughs, corners of the city where there was no support for this bill, and creating support for this bill until finally in 1986 it passed. Another thing that strikes me about this is really how recent it was, if you think about it. I moved to New York in 2001. It was like 15 years before that this bill had passed. I mean, really not that far in the past. And one of the most important things about learning about this is that we need to know about this now more than ever. We need to hear these stories now more than ever. Because a lot was learned during those 15 years. A lot was learned. We need those lessons now for the fights that we're fighting now. Also, the hopelessness that it's so easy to feel right now, as if no amount of fighting is going to work, and that they're always going to be stepping on us. They're always going to be blocking the LGBTQ community from reaching full equality, especially trans women of color in communities who've never had anything close to the kind of equality that we've won in recent years. When we feel that, it is so important to look back at how far we've come, at the victories we've won, at how much New York City has changed for the better since 1986. Because we are going to, one day in the not too distant past, we will look back at the fights that we're fighting now with the same lens. And it's hard to imagine, given how awful things can feel, but we are going to win. We are going to win, because when you have truth on your side and right on your side, and when you combine that with the fight that we have in us, we will win, and we always win, and that's what's going to happen. So let's today, as we hear from this panel, of people who were in the heat of this battle that won this landmark legislation. Let's think about the future and take hope from this story, because we won't win these battles today if we don't have that hope, if we don't have that belief that we're going to win. So I'm excited to hear from the folks here today, and it's my honor to introduce to you Stephen Petrus, the Director of Public History Programs at LaGuardia and Wagner Archives at LaGuardia Community College.
I want to begin by apologizing in a sense that I'm very sorry that Eldon Klingon could not be here with us today. We interviewed him for this digital exhibit, which just opened this afternoon, and it was a remarkable interview. He introduced the legislation for the Gay Rights Bill in 1971, co-sponsored it along with Council Member Carter Burden from the Upper East Side. It was also supported by Ted Weiss and Leonard Skolnick, other council members, but very few at the time, just a handful. And in lieu of, in his absence, I do want to play a short clip. I asked our colleagues at the Roosevelt House from his oral history interview and to play a short clip where he talks a little bit about the reasoning for supporting this legislation. He was socialist in background. He did support the environmental movement, as Professor Holzer mentioned, and he saw it not just as a legislation to prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and housing, employment, and public accommodations, but like Alan Roscoff, as the beginning of a social revolution, as a focal point of social agitation, as he says in this clip. So I want to play this short clip and then bring the panelists up front, and then we can begin our conversation. So would you play the clip, please?
We got this idea that the phrase we would use is sexual orientation, and this took a good deal of time to try to work out what we were going to do. That basically meant that gays and lesbians would have protection in the areas of housing and employment. Now, it didn't seem to me at the time that that was a great deal, but I never thought of this bill as being simply what it said. I always saw this bill as being a focal point for agitation.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Again, I'm Stephen Petrus from LaGuardia and Wagner Archives, and I should introduce the panelists here briefly. To my left is Alan Roscoff. Alan Roscoff, gay rights activist and leader in the LGBTQ+ movement and social justice movements for over 5 decades. Alan helped achieve early victories for the LGBT movement, including co-authoring the nation's first gay rights bill. Of course, we'll talk about that tonight. We first got involved in 1970 when you joined the Gay Activists Alliance, and of course, we'll talk about the GAA. You became chair of the Municipal Government Committee, along with Jim Owls, co-founded nation's first gay democratic club. You've worked on hundreds of political campaigns since the 1970s, including the congressional races of Bella Abzug, headed lesbians and gays for David Dinkins, Mario Cuomo, and there's so much more, but I'm delighted to be here. I interviewed all 3 of these individuals for our exhibit, and thank you, Alan. To Alan's left is Chaz Brack, who studied documentary arts at Antioch College in Ohio, graduating with a degree in cultural and interdisciplinary arts upon his arrival in New York City, 1983? Sorry? 83. Brack became involved in Men of All Colors Together. It was actually called Black and White Men Together at the time, an interracial gay men's group. I just did a presentation on this organization at the Queer History Conference, and that was really remarkable, learning more about this organization. You took a position in the New York City Commission on Human Rights and the Gay and Lesbian Discrimination Documentation Project, AIDS Discrimination Unit. During your tenure, you co-founded and performed with Lavender Light Gospel Choir for over 15 years. As a result of his work with the Lavender Light and the Black LGBTQ sacred community, you became a charter member of and ordained as a deacon in Unity Fellowship Church. Thank you, Chaz. We'll talk more about these issues. And finally, Katie Taylor, a lifelong activist and community organizer for human rights and economic justice, born and raised in the Midwest. Katie attended the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and in the mid-1970s moved to New York, where she became a member of the editorial collective Heresies, a feminist journal on art and politics. In the 1980s, Katie worked at the New York City Commission on Human Rights, and from 1983 to 85, served as director of the Commission's Gay and Lesbian Discrimination Documentation Project, working closely with Chaz, chronicling complaints of sexual orientation discrimination in housing, employment, and public accommodations. And I can go on, but I'm really delighted to be here with these esteemed panelists. And just for starters, following the Stonewall Rebellion of 1969, we see a surge of activism, as Councilmember Bottcher points out, and the formation of many organizations, coalition building. And as we know, coalition building is crucial to the success of any social justice movement. You all were involved in many different organizations, and I want to begin by asking you a little bit about some of these organizations. Alan, the Gay Activists Alliance, you joined early on after it was established in 1969. Shortly thereafter, you joined. Chaz and Katie worked for the New York City Human Rights Commission, and again, for Black and White Men Together. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you would all just inform the audience about these organizations, why you joined, what kind of work you did, I think it would really shed light on the movement for gay and lesbian rights in the 70s and 80s in New York City. Alan?
Can you hear me? Is this on? Okay. The Gay Activists Alliance, GAA, was the first militant gay organization in the country. Before us, there was like organizations like Mattachine, where they had discussions, but they weren't out of the closet. And it was the Gay Activists Alliance that really brought us, put us in people's living rooms. Before a group of us came out, the only people who were openly gay, semi-openly gay, were people on Dick Cavett or Jack Parr, et cetera, who had their faces digitalized out, or they spoke in shadows, because there was nobody that was publicly gay. Not only that, there wasn't one openly gay person working in city government. We were nowhere. We were not talked about. And if we were made fun of. You know the stories that they told about us and the jokes. For instance, and I'll have to be brief, when a movie, I forget the name of the movie, Something Bloody Sunday, when a same-sex couple kissed, the theater gasped. It was unheard of. There was another movie called Mondo Cane, and they showed strange things from all over the world. And one of them was in the Netherlands, and it was two men dancing. Shocking. Shocking. And that's what we did. We put ourselves in everybody's living room. We had demonstrations. We had zaps. We were front page of newspapers consistently. And we brought our community into the living rooms. And every household had to discuss us at the dinner table, because we were now visible and we were very loud.
Thank you, thank you. The Gay Activists Alliance headquarters was located in Soho on Wooster Street at a place called 99 Wooster Street at a firehouse, or it was called the Firehouse because, well, not so creatively, it used to be a firehouse. So let's call it the Firehouse. And they had these Saturday night dances attended by hundreds and hundreds of individuals, even up to 1,000, right? Did you
Yes.
take part in these?
We charged $2 a head, but you got free beer.
We're going to talk more about ZAPs too, because I want to really dive into these methods, and you were centrally involved in these, as Professor Holzer mentioned in his introduction. But Chaz, could you talk about your work for the New York City Human Rights Commission? You arrived in New York in 1983 following your undergraduate stint in Ohio, worked for the Discrimination Documentation Project. Can you tell us a little bit about your work there?
Yeah, sure. I started at the New York City Commission on Human Rights in 1985, and it was because of my work with Black and White Men Together, which then morphed into Men of All Colors Together. They were looking for a new investigator. Actually, Katie was my boss there, so a little detail. And so I went there to basically be among the people who were taking the cases of discrimination that were housing, housing, employment, and public accommodation. So if people were coming to the Commission on Human Rights to make those complaints, I was the investigator that did their intake. So it was a pretty simple action there, but you know, it morphed into things later on.
So you're collecting incidents of discrimination in these areas. Like, how exactly were you doing this?
Well, you know, this was not exactly, you know, internet savvy era at that point. But, you know, people would come to make complaints, and they would do that in person, physically. We also, you know, were the documentation project for the AIDS Discrimination Division. So there were, of course, instances where there were men who could not make it to the commission. I would jump on the subway with a clipboard and, you know, a few pieces of paper to do an intake there. So, you know, it would happen wherever we needed it to happen.
In our archives at LaGuardia and Wagner, we have the City Council collection. We have both of these reports from '85 and also the one before your time in 1981. And it's interesting to me because many individuals did not sign their last name, would not use their last name. Did you recall this?
We didn't encourage people to use their last names necessarily. So at one point, we decided to kind of implore the Men of All Colors Together to join with the New York City Commission on Human Rights. And we went out on Friday evenings, Saturday evenings to Christopher Street, and with our clipboards just collected stories that were not yet actionable because there was no laws on the book. But, you know, the opponents of the bill were saying that it doesn't happen. And we're like, that's impossible. Of course it happens. So we took it to the street. You know, my involvement with the movement was decidedly grassroots. And so, you know, on Christopher Street, clipboards in hand, many pieces of paper, we just stopped people in the street and say, have you been discriminated in these areas of public accommodation, employment, and housing, or even more so, just being harassed on the street? And we got tomes and tomes of information from folks.
It's a really rich document. And also in the City Council collection, we have letters to the Majority Leader vehemently opposed to gay rights, Majority Leader Tom Cute from 1969 to '85. People wouldn't sign their last name because fear of repercussions. I might lose my job, I might get evicted. So that's really telling too, and even supporting like fundraisers, you wouldn't write out a check because your name is on the check, so you just might give $5, $10. And you see that in this report, which is a remarkable source that Katie was director of. Katie, could you say a few words about your work at the Human Rights Commission as director of the Discrimination Documentation Project?
Yes. Can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. I came to the Human Rights Commission, I think it was '82 that I started, and I was in what they call the Patterns and Practices Unit, which was the one part of the commission that looked at systemic discrimination. And I think in part because my boss and I were the two out gay people at the commission, when AIDS, reports of AIDS discrimination started coming to the commission, they sent it to us. And so we were just sort of left with trying to figure out what to do in the face of these kind of very early era of AIDS. But what AIDS did was created an opening for gay folks to also come to us. And I think that's a significant part of the story, that AIDS actually made this opening, as crises will create openings. But my background, I came to the commission after, since I was a teenager and being an activist and a community organizer in many other movements, including the early years of the gay movement. And I had been involved in the women's movement primarily, which is where a lot of my activism had been once I was in New York. But when I came to the commission, I brought that perspective and also those connections. And so when we saw these complaints that were arriving on our door, there was nothing that we could do about it because there was no protection for gay men and lesbians. And so at the very least, we just started to document it, which I knew from my other work was also pretty important, to just be able to tell the stories. And without a whole lot of effort put into it, by the first year, we had collected, I don't know how much it was, 100 and something stories, and that was just in my spare time. I was doing it in my spare time. And when I actually did the statistics, when I did the math on it compared to all other forms of discrimination cases that were being brought to the Human Rights Commission, the reports of anti-gay, lesbian discrimination constituted 18.9% of the total number of complaints brought to the commission. And that shocked me even. But it kind of woke people up that this was something that we needed to take seriously. And so in the next year, I think that was when you came on, around then, I contacted folks that I had had relationships with from my community work, and we worked with them to try and, they did the outreach to their constituents, and some of it was just mailed out to folks, and they sent it back in, but as you know, that tends to not be, you don't get a high return on something like that, and so then we started actually going out into the streets and collecting stories. And by the second year, the complaints that we had documented of lesbian gay discrimination constituted a third of the total number of complaints that came to the commission of every other category, including all the other categories.
So this report was completed in 1985. A copy of the report was submitted to Mayor Koch and to the city council members. Bizarre to me that you see in 1986, on the eve of the vote, when the bill was finally passed, some council members like Noak Deer from, there it is, from Brooklyn, Enoch Williams, said, discrimination, what discrimination? There's no discrimination, but this report, it seems to me, maybe provided cover for some of those who could say, well, now I have to vote for the bill, it's been documented officially. So your work is really, I think, significant and invaluable, officially chronicling, and you have the publication. I want to go back to Alan, the Gay Activists Alliance, ZAPS. We're talking about raising awareness, the Human Rights Commission. We'll talk about Black and White Men Together, but your work at the GAA in the early 1970s, participating and helping to organize ZAPs. Would you take us through, tell us what a ZAP was and give us an example?
A ZAP was when we got together publicly and loudly to expose an injustice to our community. I'll tell you two very quick ones. There's an article in the New York Post where they were at the Rainbow Room. There was a man and a woman, two men, they thought, dancing. It wound up that the woman was wearing a pantsuit. And it was an article about them being stopped from dancing because it was against the rules. If you any place that had a cabaret license, same-sex couples could not dance. So the next night, 8 of us, 4 women and 4 men. We went to the Rainbow Room. I remember getting out of the elevator. And we had Earl Wilson there from the New York Post. He was Liz Smith's predecessor. So there was a woman singing. It's still in the article. I forget her name. And we danced man, man, woman, and then all of a sudden we danced man, 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 man. And we danced with our arms around each other, with our heads on each other's shoulder, and a very slow dance. And the management didn't know what to do because Earl Wilson came up with his photographers and started snapping pictures of us. Lo and behold, 2 or 3 days later, article in the Post, gays win in a waltz. And it was no longer illegal for us to dance in public. And we had one other demonstration, which I'll tell you about, which was really big. It made the front page of every newspaper, not just the day after it happened, but for weeks. We were told that the Inner Circle, which was a fundraiser all the press holds yearly, they still do, where they do skits about what's going on in city government, and they have elected officials come up on stage. It was a much bigger deal then than it is now. So the governor was there, our 2 U.S. senators, the mayor was there, council members, senators. I mean, everybody of importance was in that audience. Harold knows this. So a group of us, Jim Owls, Bruce Voller, and some others, went there in our denim GAA jackets. You know, we were all hippies, I had long hair. And I went up on stage with a bullhorn. And I said, this dinner is now over. It is not permitted in the city of New York to make fun of gay people anywhere. So everybody could go home. So Michael May, who was head of the firefighters union, big guy, he comes up on stage, grabs me by my collar, takes me all the way out where the escalator is. This is a Statler Hilton. Throws me down the escalator. As he did this, Jim Owls came and said, you can't do that. He took Jim Owls, put him on the escalator, and smashed his head. Jim was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital. He almost lost his eye. There are pictures of him and his eye. And it made front page of every single newspaper. Ken O'Letter, and I mean, all the reporters were on this. And once again, we were front page in everybody's living room, everybody's breakfast table, and everybody knew what was going on. And that's how we became part of the fabric of New York City. And, you know, it was us, it was the women's movement, it was the anti-war movement, it was Martin Luther King, and it was all happening at once. It was a glorious time, and we created a revolution. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's important to know the intersections of these movements in the late 60s and early 70s, as you say. And you mentioned Jim Owls, you're president of the Jim Owls. A lover. Ran for city council, was the first openly gay man to run for office in New York City. Ran in 1973, Eric, in your district, though the lines have shifted, in Greenwich Village. Member of the GAA, founder of the Gay Activist Alliance. I think he won only about 17%, but an important incremental step, because here we see the gay and lesbian movement building networks, a political infrastructure, lobbying, knocking on doors, sending out pamphlets, everything you need to do to become successful. So it's an important step. And in city council, at the time, again, I mentioned Tom Cute. I think he's largely forgotten today, but such a powerful individual. Again, majority leader. Before we had speaker, we had majority leader, represented Brooklyn, Park Slope, Windsor Terrace, Sunset Park, Red Hook, these neighborhoods. Kept the bill, the gay rights bill, introduced by Eldon Klingon and Carter Burden in the General Welfare Committee. So folks, Before the bill would get a full floor vote in City Council, it had to get out of the General Welfare Committee. And Cute, close ties to the Catholic Church, an advisor to Cardinal Spellman, Cardinal Cook, and then Cardinal O'Connor ultimately appointed folks opposed to gay rights. So it almost never got out of the General Welfare Committee for a full floor vote, but it did in 1974. We were talking on the phone yesterday, Alan, about this vote. There was a degree of optimism that it might in fact get passed. Could you take us back to 1974 when the bill finally got out of General Welfare Committee for a full floor vote in City Council? What happened?
Yeah, well, just a little bit of history is we had a great deal of support for the gay rights bill. We had council members, well, after the initial introduction by the 4 council members, talk about the bill obviously dominated the city council. Carol Greitzer, who was Ed Koch's co-district leader, Ed Koch, the closet case, refused to support the gay rights bill and made fun of the bill to Eldon Klingon. He verified it. So a district leader in Greenwich Village thought that Eldon Klingon was insane for introducing such a piece of legislation. But what happened by 1974, we had the best minds working on this bill. We had the Gay Activist Alliance, but we also had a group called Coalition of Conscience. And our headquarters was the New York Civil Liberties Union on 5th Avenue and 14th Street. We were the ones that brought forward the pink triangle. We made the pink triangle a national symbol of gay oppression, because that's what homosexuals were in Nazi concentration camps. And we really, really, really got the hearts and minds of a majority of the city council. And we had sponsors of that bill who wound up voting against it. Morty Povman from Forest Hills, Monroe Cohn from Mill Basin, Fred Samuel, closet case from Harlem, Aileen Ryan, our biggest enemy, signed a document that I still have saying she was voting for the gay rights bill. And so did Tom Manton, who is a county leader in Queens, signed a document. You know what happened? Tom Cute had Tom Manton's father call him and say, if you vote for this bill, I will disown you. Tom Manton was chairing the meeting, called the recess, and disappeared. Aileen Ryan, who also signed the document, I got them all to sign the document. I was a cute little kid. They did what I wanted. They signed the she'd signed the document, and then she got into a car and claimed she got lost driving. So she didn't make it back. Sam Horowitz, who wound up being great for us many years later, was prepared to vote for the bill. And we were at his desk in the basement of City Hall, and he says, I can't vote for it. Buddy Beam, Ed Beam's nephew, I believe it was, said that if you said if you vote for the bill, I am running against you, the mayor's son. Sam Horowitz says, I can't vote for it. And that was the day we knew the bill was going to be defeated that day. We knew it. It was, if you had to pick why the bill was defeated, it was Tom Cute, the majority leader, the Catholic Church, and Ed Koch later on, and of course groups like Agudath Israel, the right-wing, very conservative Jewish organizations, and also the police and firefighters. Monroe Cohn represented Mill Basin, and he was sponsoring the bill, wound up having a lesbian daughter, and the firefighters, it was a very upper middle class district, hounded him. And as far the last one, as far as the Jews were concerned in conservative districts, I had a debate with Fabian Schoenfeld, who was head of the Rabbinical Council, in a shul that Morty Povman chaired. It was the Brandeis Association, very prominent Jewish group. At the end, we took a vote. The room was overwhelmingly in favor of the gay rights bill. The next day, Morty Popman voted against it. He wouldn't go against Fabian Schoenfeld.
So the bill got a full floor vote in 74, defeated, would go back to the General Welfare Committee during the Beam administration for several more years. 1977, Ed Koch is elected mayor in a highly contentious Democratic primary. There was a degree of hope. And we'll talk about Ed Koch in a few minutes. Because he was supportive of gay rights in Congress, right? He was in Congress from 69 to 76. We'll talk more about Koch. He's a figure that looms very large in this exhibit. I asked everybody their take on Koch, and we'll talk more. But I want to return to Chaz. In 1980, in San Francisco, March, the group was formed, Black and White Men Together. Chapters formed nationwide. The New York chapter in June 1980, Black and White Men Together. You came to New York in 83, joined the group, and to me, what struck me about the group, Black and White Men Together, an interracial gay men's group, the consciousness-raising sessions that you had, and also your work documenting discrimination within the gay community. Would you tell us a little bit about these consciousness-raising sessions and the BWMT Discrimination Documentation Project?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So the reason I joined Black and White Men Together is because I went to Antioch College. We had a co-op department, which meant that every 3 to 6 months you left campus to work in your field of study. I get to San Francisco. I'm working at the Urban School of San Francisco, and meeting other young gay men and trying to go to bars. That was not very successful. It was actually, I went there because it was San Francisco, it was Mecca, in 1979. Could not get into most of the bars that I went to in San Francisco because of the color of my skin. If I did get into the bar, I would be flanked by a white man on the left and one on the right at the bar. I'd order a drink and be ignored. So my introduction and the reason I joined Black and White Men Together was not necessarily altruistic. It was because I was enraged and I was hurt by what I was experiencing in the community. So when I got to New York, I started finding some of the same dynamics on Christopher Street. So thumbing through, I think it was the Village Voice back then, pre-internet, I found this organization, and their byline was a gay men's organization fighting racism, sexism, homophobia, and anti-Semitism in the gay community. That was my wheelhouse. I went to Antioch College. I'm like, this is heaven for me. And my esteemed colleague, Mitchell Karp, was one of the co-chairs of Black and White Men Together. And I would say that those men in that organization, I was a 23-year-old, they raised me. That organization had consciousness raising about any kind of topic that you could come up with that, was a challenge to the norms. So we had conversations about anti-Semitism. We had Seders at Passover. We talked about sexism in the gay community. We also did actions against the Ice Palace, as well as, Mitchell, I think he could probably weigh in on this too from the audience, but again, we took that stuff to the street because inside the community, inside the gay community, there was racism, sexism, and homophobia. But we wanted to bring that stuff to the fore and have the whole community grow up, as a community, but bringing everybody along.
Thank you, and I see Mitchell. Nice to see you, Mitchell. He also participated in the exhibit, A Wonderful Oral History. He also loaned me this folder of newsletters from Black and White Men Together, massive amount of material which we added to our LGBTQ collection at LaGuardia and Wagner Archives. So we really appreciate that, documenting this story. And I had never heard of it. These protests at the Ice Palace on West 57th Street from 1981 to 1984, this gay disco, the black and white men together. They sent a group of 10 individuals, 4 black men, two couples, an interracial couple, and 4 white men. The 4 black men are all stopped at the door at the Ice Palace on West 57th Street in November 1981. We need forms of ID, courtesy cards. What's a courtesy card? Here's an application. You need to fill out an application and send it. We'll send it back to you to see if you're approved. Meanwhile, the interracial couple got in, no problem. The 4 white men get in, and then there's picketing, coalition building. Other groups go to the Ice Palace to protest, to inform people, passers-by, other gay men entering, hey, this organization, the Ice Palace, practices discriminatory policies at their door. Ultimately, and Mitchell was legal counsel, won the case against the Ice Palace. And I thought to myself, why don't I know this? There was no coverage in the New York media except for the Village Voice and Gay City News. So it's really important that we document this and talk about this. So thank you to both of you for your work. Katie, we're talking about gender in the movement. At first glance, it seems like the movement was led by white middle-class men from lower Manhattan. We know of single individuals, women such as Joyce Hunter, who is here, Betty Santoro, Eleanor Cooper, just to name a few. But would you talk a little bit about the intersection, because that's, we're talking about intersections now, between second wave feminism and the gay and lesbian movement and overlap in your work at that intersection after you arrive in the city in the mid to late 1970s?
Yeah, it's true. I think I attended the first gay rights march in Chicago, where it just happened I was in the front with the drag queens, and we were pummeled with eggs, and it was hot. And so the eggs were all cooking by the time I got back home. My shoes were stuck, my sandals were stuck to my feet. And I had been active in the gay rights movement, but was always up against dealing with sexism. And when I got to the city, things were actually much more segregated in activism in general. And when I was in the Midwest, and I was living in Madison at the time, things were more, the bars, for example, were both men and women. Here, everything was much more separated. But I think that I and a lot of women like me who were activists and also out and gay were ended up doing our activism in the context of the women's movement. And it's true still today that much of the forefront of the women's movement were actually lesbians, but not necessarily out, because there actually wasn't the room for that within the women's movement. So wherever you were running into problems. But so I had been very active in the women's movement in New York and worked on, there's a whole, there was a very large grant, block grant that came to New York to fund, it was the first funding probably for any frontline and grassroots women's organizations in the city. And I think there were 20 or 25 organizations that were funded, and I worked at one of those organizations, New York Women Against Rape, for a number of years, but then went on to work in one of the first organizations that dealt with sexual harassment on the job, for example. And that's where I had been doing my activism. But for any of you that have done that, like one of the things I used to say about when I started working at the commission was so striking. For years and years, I had, you would call someone and say, I'm calling from the Working Women's Institute, for example, and they would say, oh, he's not here. I was trying to deal with sexual harassment on the job, and I was getting nowhere because there was no teeth behind the Working Women's Institute. As soon as I got to the commission, I would say, I'm calling from the New York City Commission on Human Rights. And we say, oh, we'll get him out of that meeting, which was a nice change of pace. And also, a part of my motivation for going after the job at the commission was, as many of you know, I just needed to make money. I had worked for no money for so long, and it was a real change of pace to actually have a job with a paycheck that you got, and insurance and things like that. It was like a whole change of pace. I was going to say something else about that. Let's see. I think but for me, it was a real shock to the system to start working at the Human Rights Commission. But I went after that job at the commission like I had never done before, because I knew that AIDS was going to mean what it meant, meaning that all of the issues that I cared about could be worked on from that vantage point. Here was this kind of social opening that happened. I could work on the impact on women, on gender and sex and gay rights, all from that vantage point, with the advantages that came from being able to do that from the platform of the city. So it was a real learning curve, a vertical learning curve for me to figure out what that meant. But it was a really great example, I think, of what we did at the commission, of an inside-outside partnership. You know, that you're working both from the inside and the outside, and then squeeze. And in fact, it really allowed lots and lots of movement in places that there hadn't been any for some time.
Thank you, Katie. And this is intersectionality before it became an academic term on the streets of New York at the grassroots level. Let's return to Ed Koch. He's the most disputed figure in this exhibit. Interviewed, conducted oral histories with 25 individuals, asked everybody their take on Ed Koch. Some very pro, like John LeCicero, who was special advisor to Koch for many years. Alan, your critique was scathing. Would you, and if you didn't know already, he was a closeted gay mayor. There was the lengthy expose in the New York Times 2 years ago. I'm sure many read that. If you haven't, please go read it. It's really illuminating. Alan, would you talk about Koch and gay rights, the movement to pass the gay rights bill, your take? I mean, he takes office in '78. Pretty soon thereafter, he passes an executive order number 4, banning discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation for city workers and city hiring.
We had that. John Lindsay, we forced John Lindsay to issue that many years. He may have reissued it and done something with it, but John Lindsay, we zapped the hell out of John Lindsay. His wife, Mary, screamed at us, but we got that executive order.
And then, what were your expectations? He's elected following this contentious Democratic mayoral primary. Koch, Bella, Cuomo, Percy Sutton, Badillo.
When A. Beam was lame duck, which was a period between the election and when the new mayor took office, we had a meeting, and John LeCicero was at that meeting. There was maybe half a dozen of us, and we said, look, John, we know we could get the bill passed right now because there were council members who were leaving in a few months, and they were willing to vote for the bill. In addition, the mayor has the power to say, look, you're going to be out of office in 4 months. I'll take care of you. You're going to need a job. Your son's going to need whatever. And John LeCicero said any mayor worth their salt could get this bill passed within 30 or 60 days. This was in 1979 or 78. No, 77. Bill didn't pass until 86. Ed Koch decided that if your reason for not voting for the bill was based on religious convictions, then you got to pass, like Donald Trump. If you're religious, you don't have to obey civil rights laws. So he let people off the hook by proclaiming that. Ed Koch was famous for, everybody knew he was gay. We knew when somebody in the gay community would tell us that they were at his house and they had a private dinner, we knew that person would become a commissioner. I can name them. There was a lawyer on the Corp Council who actually became a commissioner under David Dinkins, who was called to Ed Koch's apartment when he lived at 2 Fifth Avenue. And Ed Koch's gay best friend, Herb Rickman, who referred to us in the gay movement as show fags in a newspaper article, asked this guy, Dennis, to go into the bedroom. And how do we know this? Because before Dennis died, he sent a letter to Wayne Barrett telling him about this. And Ed Koch put the moves on him. Now, I'm really sorry, but when you're the mayor and somebody works for you in corp council, that's like really inappropriate, especially it's inappropriate when you say that you're heterosexual. So, yeah, Koch was famous for that. He was famous also for being blatantly racist and a few other things. But it was because of that, we could have gotten that bill through within 30 or 60 days. We could have gotten the bill through prior, the lame duck period. Absolutely. I'm not lying to you. That bill was going to be passed. And so Ed Koch, what can I say? You know what I have to say, but that was Ed Koch.
Congressman Koch different than Mayor Koch because he's congressman in Manhattan, but now he's mayor of New Yorkers in all 5 boroughs, and part of his base were conservative white ethnics in Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, and the Bronx. And remember, this is Archie Bunker era,
If I may,
right?
he switched from being a progressive Congress member to being a right-wing candidate for mayor, talking insistently about the death penalty, which he didn't talk about when he was Congress. Also, I know I'm talking too much, he did rallies on and on and on all over the city, and he had a beard. His beard was Bess Meyerson. And the front page of the New York Post was a picture of them practically kissing, saying that he was thinking of marrying Bess Meyerson. So that's how he became mayor, a total fraud. We have a bill that we're trying to get introduced in the city council to take his name off the 59th Street Bridge. That bill was passed because Chris Quinn was going to be running for mayor and she wanted Ed Koch's support. Koch fooled her, he died. So we are trying to get that bill. We have 26 members of the city council supporting it. We have Attorney General Tish James, State Controller Tom DiNapoli, Public Advocate. We need a new sponsor once the new council comes in. And if I have my dithers, Eric Botcher, we need you here. Thank you.
For those who don't know, Bess Meyerson was a former Miss America, the first Jewish Miss America, right? So this is part of Koch's campaign strategy orchestrated by David Garth, his media guru, in '77 to give the appearance that he's not gay. Look,
David Garth referred to Ed Koch and Bess Meyerson as Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
Chaz and Katie, your take on Ed Koch working for in capacity of your work for the Human Rights Commission.
I have a different experience with him, meaning I wasn't dealing with him as Ed Koch the politician, but Ed Koch the mayor. And just a small anecdote was my first meeting with him, I think, was to talk about this report. And in a room with all commissioners, and I had gone with our commissioner at the time, was Marcella Maxwell, and I was just there as her kind of support person. And I was surprised, really surprised, that the public persona that he presented was so very different than how he was in that meeting. He was very soft-spoken. He spent most of the time listening. But the thing that really struck me was that he heard from all the commissioners what they had to say, but then he turned to me and said, "What do you think?" And listened at length and asked me all kinds of questions, and then asked all of the other support people that normally would have been invisible in a meeting like that what we thought. That was unusual.
I just remember being at, I think it was an event at the Lesbian and Gay Center after the bill passed, and he came to some event, and I didn't shake his hand.
In your oral history interview, you remarked how slow he was to respond to the AIDS crisis.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, we were hearing cases, you know, at the Commission on Human Rights, and were imploring him to speak out. Because basically, like Katie was, you know, alluding to, is that the AIDS crisis basically kind of opened the door for other areas of discrimination. So it was like our opponents were saying, see, we told you. Everything that we've said about them is true, and now look where we are. And so, you know, to have the mayor get in front of that and actually support one of his agencies, the New York City Commission on Human Rights, would have been great. It just did not happen.
My last question, thank you, Chaz, before I open it up to audience Q&A. Political history in New York, a real turning point, the 1985 citywide elections. Tom Cute retired. The majority leader, as I mentioned, vehemently opposed to the gay rights bill. Ed Koch is reelected to his third term, popular mayor. And now we're going to have jockeying for a new speaker of the city council. Alan, could you take us through this? Who becomes the new speaker in 1986 and how the gay rights bill gets passed? Because you were centrally involved working and lobbying.
The new speaker is going to be Sam Horowitz, who represented Coney Island. He had all of Manhattan voted for him, and he had one extra vote to secure the speakership. There was a council member in Manhattan, Robert Dreyfus. Robert Dreyfus represented the east side of Manhattan. He decided that he would vote for Peter Vallone on one condition, that Peter Vallone will allow the gay rights bill to come out of the committee. Now, Peter Vallone went to church every day. Every day he was at Mass in the morning. And he was against the gay rights bill for religious reasons and, and for other bigoted reasons. And so he wanted to be speaker so badly that he promised Bob Dreyfus that he would allow the bill out of committee. So to hell with his religious beliefs when it affected his well-being. And he let the bill out, but he voted against it. But he let the bill out. So people thought Peter Vallone was honorable. He was not honorable. He was less than honorable. He was a skunk. He let that bill out for his career. But we did get the bill out, and we're all grateful about that. And Bob Dreyfus, who screwed the progressive wing of the Democratic Party throughout the city, did do something good.
City Council voted March 1986, a full floor vote, 21-14, the passage of Intro 2, finally after 15 years. What a saga. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Again, you really have to explore this exhibit. Could we put the exhibit up? Is that possible, Aaron? Okay, I don't know. Yeah, it's on LaGuardia and Wagner Archives website. It's divided into 10 themes that I selected, 25 oral histories, as I mentioned, and these three and several others in the audience comment on different aspects of the passage of the bill, the movement to pass the bill. And so you can hear their oral history excerpts supplemented by archival sources from the City Council collection at LaGuardia and Wagner Archives. So I think it's a really rich resource for the public, for educators and teachers. Thank you all for your contributions. Our students took photographs of these individuals. They're beautiful portraits. I want to make this point as well. They also helped conduct the oral history interviews. We've got time for audience Q&A. Any questions? Will we pass around a microphone? Okay, somebody's there. Okay, yes.
In your personal histories of employment, were you discriminated against, or how were you discriminated against?
The question was about employment discrimination. Did you face employment discrimination?
Oh, yes, it was rampant. I was fired from teaching in it was rampant. I was fired from teaching in three separate jobs. Three separate teaching jobs. When I worked at the Department of Social Service and I was called a faggot by a coworker, I mean, it was tolerated and it was okay. There were absolutely zero protections. People did not come out of work because they knew they'd be fired. A very funny story. When I got fired at a school, it was called the Adams School in Murray Hill. I got called in by the assistant principal, and he told me that I was being fired because they saw me on TV at a gay rights demonstration, and the parents would object. So he fired me, and it wasn't until I saw him come out of an orgy room at the club baths that I had the opportunity to confront him.
I did not experience any discrimination. I was working, my first job in New York City was at a company called AFP, American Film Producers, and we distributed Coca-Cola commercials. So the arts, you know, not much there. And then my second job in New York City was at the New York City Commission on Human Rights in the Lesbian and Gay Discrimination Documentation Project. So I had it good.
All right, somebody else, a question? Yeah, sir.
Hi. You all mentioned the power of the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Jewish community at that time. Wasn't there also some resistance from the Black Church, or did they really not have that much power in government to really influence it then?
Do you want to take that, Chaz?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Well, you mentioned that the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Jews were very much against the bill. If I recall, there was also, the Black churches were against it at that time. But I don't know if they were influential enough to really make a big difference. I just want to know your opinions on that.
Yeah, I don't remember them being that influential, and there were some actions going on around that time as well. I can talk about the Black Caucus of Men of All Colors Together was actually the body that birthed Lavender Light Gospel Choir. And Lavender Light Gospel Choir started basically as an art project because of, the men in the Black Caucus. We were just reminiscing about growing up, and we wanted to create a space where you didn't have to choose between your sexuality and your race. And that's when we started the choir, to kind of push back from some of that noise that was coming from the Black church and, bringing that question of intersectionality into that arena. And from Lavender Light Gospel Choir actually was born Unity Fellowship Church, because during the apex of the AIDS epidemic, there was no one ministering to Black men who were dying. And so Carl Bean, who was an activist on the West Coast at Unity Fellowship Church, was also one of the founders of the Minority AIDS Project in Los Angeles. We contacted Archbishop Bean and had him bring someone to New York, where we started Unity Fellowship Church, which then enjoys like about 12 chapters on the East Coast. But what I'm getting to is that the Black gay community was a burgeoning community at this time as well. And so you had artists like Asado Saint, Donald Woods, Don Suggs, so many Black gay men. You had Salsa Soul Sisters. There were a bunch of organizations that were pushing back just against the Black community in terms of, the movement, but I don't remember them ever having a pinnacle or a buy-in to some of the information that was getting disseminated about getting Intro 2 passed.
Yeah, I would say by and large that the traditional, if you will, African-American church was opposed to the gay rights bill. The Black Caucus, of course, was that you represented with Men of All Colors Together. But I think, we see Reverend Cecil Butler, just to name one, who testified in City Council March '86, was just vitriolic and vile in his testimony against gay rights. So I would say by and large, is that fair?
Well, yeah, but here's the thing that, I don't think it's a secret. In the Black church, look in the choir stand. we were all there, you know, and some of us were the deacons, some of us were the pastors. So without our involvement in the black church, it would have kind of fallen apart because we were so ensconced in, you know, the workings of the organizations. But
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, yes.
Alan, when Klinger and Carter Burden left the council, who did you rely on to carry your water to get the bill to ultimately pass?
Well, as I know, there were 4 city council members who introduced the bill. It was Eldon Klingon, Carter Burden, who represented the Upper East Side, Ted Weiss, who represented the Upper West Side, and Leonard Skolnick, who represented Brooklyn Heights and that area. After Eldon left, oh wow, who took that bill? Bobby Steingart was a mover and shaker in that bill. Bobby represented the at-large council member in Brooklyn. Every party then had 2 at-large. Every borough had 2 at-large council members from different political parties. It was declared unconstitutional, so it doesn't exist anymore. But Bobby was really, really devoted, and he was a major player. I don't remember. I'm really sorry. I don't remember who carried it. I remember the discussions of who should carry it. At one point, I wanted June Island, who was a council member from Riverdale, to carry it because, you know, out of a borough other than Manhattan. But I forget. I'm getting
Miriam
old.
Friedlander. Miriam Friedlander.
Miriam Friedlander was an incredible advocate, but she wasn't a chief sponsor of the bill. Ruth Messenger was an incredible advocate, but I don't think she was the chief sponsor. We had incredible people on the council fighting for us. We had Father Gigante, the so-called hoodlum priest from the South Bronx, Italian, who called me one morning and said, I need to see you. And I said, okay. He says, meet me in the car. So he says, I'm writing a statement on the gay rights bill. I've called the press conference. All the press thought he was issuing a statement against the bill. I helped him write his pro statement for the bill, and it was a major press conference, and it was really, really great. We just had incredible people supporting us, and not only did we have the council people, we had in many cases their spouses, because we became friends with their spouses. And one very quick story, we had a council member from Queens, Eugene Mastropieri, who was against the bill. But the night before, we had drinks at this place, all these pals, and his girlfriend said to him, I'm not going to have sex with you tonight unless you promise you're voting for the bill tomorrow. Well, they must have had good sex, because it was the one time he voted for the bill.
New York politics. Okay. Yeah, one more. Yeah, Dr. Lieberman.
Great stories. Great. Alan, one fellow that's left out of this discussion is Bobby Wagner. And I'd like you to talk about Bobby Wagner and where was Bobby, who was close to Vallone, close to Koch. Where was Bobby Wagner in this history?
Bobby Wagner. I don't know. Harold, how do I talk about Bobby Wagner? Then we have to talk about Donna. Anyway, Bobby, I don't know what to say. He was a bachelor. How about if I say that? He was the former mayor's son, and he happened to have been good on the bill, and he was a mover and shaker on it. I found them rather strange, and that's all I'm going to say about him. You could read all you want into it.
Can I add
Go
a
ahead.
piece here that Charles reminded me of? That there's another little aspect here of the religious communities trying to thwart or interfere with the report that we did. I'm not sure you and I actually talked about this. that they, I think, they brought a FOIA request to the Commission, a Freedom of Information Act, because the stories, the nearly 500 stories that we had documented were all redacted, meaning that there was no identifying features, because we knew we needed to protect people's identity and had guaranteed that from the beginning in order for them to come forward. Many reports were filed anonymously, but many weren't. People actually wanted their names on there. And we had all the original documents, and we got a FOIA request, I think it was from the Catholic Church, demanding that we turn over all the original documentation. And we went through, lawyers and conversations, et cetera, but ultimately Charles and I, sat in the conference room for days, redacting, crossing out with black magic markers all of the identifying features, and then had to turn that over to the Catholic Church. But there's, in one of the articles that I gave you earlier, there's Noach Deer, the ultra-right Jewish representative from somewhere in Brooklyn, probably Williamsburg. Thank you, okay, Borough Park. Was dismissing the report, saying that these were all fabricated stories, and that we needed to prove that they weren't fabricated stories by giving over names and identifying information.
Thank you. Yeah, no, we didn't talk about that. That's really important and illuminating. Religion plays such an important role, of course, and it's one of the themes in the exhibit. And let's also point out there were some gay religious groups: Dignity for Gay Catholics, the Gay Synagogue, CBST. Bishop Paul Moore was a real champion from the Episcopal Church of gay rights. So I don't want to make blanket statements and recognize this complexity. And with that, I just want to thank you all so much for your questions. Thank you for the panelists, the wonderful commentary, really brilliant. Really honored to be here to work on this exhibit, and thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Let's thank Steve. Steve, you're fantastic.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Erin Mayo Adam. I'm the director of the LGBTQ Policy Center, and I just want to really quickly thank Stephen for putting this event together. It was a fabulous panel. Thank you so much. And the panelists. I'd like to thank the CUNY LGBTQIA+ Consortium for providing funding this evening, and the CUNY LGBTQ Advisory Council and its president, Mitch Drazen, and in addition to the City Council for its generous funding for our programming. Also our director of the Roosevelt House, who we have here, Harold Holzer, and all of our staff who made this evening possible. Thank you all so much. I also want to make 3 quick announcements. First, we're going to be announcing our Pride Policy Fellows this upcoming week. Thanks to the generous support of the City Council, we were able to award 3 Pride Policies Fellowships, which are $5,000 stipends for undergraduate students at Hunter who work on LGBTQ policy. We received 5 times the number of applicants this year than we usually did, just to show you how much this particular moment is really hitting the LGBTQ students at Hunter College, and this desire to be part of activism in the community. I want to announce 2 upcoming events. This September, we'll have a screening of the film Rustin that'll feature one of the producers in a Q&A after the film to open our fall programming. And we're also going to have another event that will actually sort of follow up on this one, which will be celebrating Ken Sherrill's impact on LGBTQ policy in New York State. Ken Sherrill recently passed away. He was a professor of political science at Hunter College, and he was the first openly gay elected official in New York State. So I don't want to keep you longer. We have a wonderful reception upstairs. Please go up and enjoy what we have available. And thank you all for coming this evening.
And if I just may, one more. We will actually continue this conversation, Alan and myself, tomorrow morning on the Brian Lehrer Show at 10:45. So tune in, because we'll talk about this subject and our exhibit. Thank you.